Anybody who watches me rant on this YouTube channel on any kind of regular basis will probably realise I really like vintage gear, vintage equipment. And part of that is because a lot of that stuff's really well made. And a lot of it's of higher quality than what you can buy today. And part of that is just the sheer history behind it. Okay, this sharpening stone that I picked up for $8, there's really just a lot of history behind this object. It's really worthy of its own little. So here's the object itself, and the box is really fascinating. And I'll get into the box in a second. But first of all, I'll show you the stone. All right, and this is absolutely fascinating because it's just so handmade. All right. Now there's two types of sharpening stones. Originally, sharpening stones were actual stone quarried from the earth, and then a little bit later on, as we go into the 20th century, stones that were man-made started to be produced. Okay, and that's a man-made stone, which is not as good in my opinion, but often they're quite lighter. Okay, you can always usually tell the natural stones that have been quarried because they have quite a bit of weight to them, as where the man-made ones are very light. They have a different feel as well. But this one is, you can see where it's been chiseled out the earth really, or maybe they use some kind of saw. All right, and it's not been completely finished. So this is the sharpening surface here, and this is the sharpening surface, and this is kind of like sort of like the ends, as it were. And even here, you can see here, it'd be hard to pick up in the camera, but it's not completely square. All right, it's been cut at a slight angle by mistake, obviously, because when you're cutting stone, it's by hand, it's quite hard to do. And again, if you see there, again, it's going to be hard to pick in camera, but it's slightly off. Okay, so it's just completely fascinating, and it's just, the mind boggles who produced this, who made this. Was it some kind of industrial process, or was it one person going off by themselves to produce this for themselves? Or I don't know, I presume there was some kind of corded industry that produced this, because the size and the dimension is very different from modern stones. This is a sharpening stone from the 1940s, okay, and they seem to have the same proportion today. All right, this is a modern stone, vintage one, and then this one, which is from the 19th century, obviously has a different proportion. Do you know what I mean? So it's before they kind of standardized this as the size. Really fascinating. I'm just blown away by this. I can't imagine the kind of physical effort that it would take to get this and cut it out of the earth. All right, and you can really see, it's just handmade. And this would, can you imagine trying to make this? How many days? If you would have to go and you'd find a good rock to do this with, and you'd have to kind of get a chisel and chisel it out, and I don't know. Would be a very hard object to make today. All right. Like I say, I presume it was a cottage industry, and somebody was selling them. And I guess it's 19th century. I've never seen a sharpening stone like this. Okay, it's really heavy, and you can just see all the hand imperfections in it. All right, and it's a really nice stone as well. It does sharpen your knives really nicely. It's about an 800 grit. It's very smooth. Okay, it's amazing. So we turn attention to the box, and the box is made from a wood, an Australian timber called red cedar. All right, and if we look at it, we can probably assume there was an offcut. Okay, and then the person has decided they've made this, or they've bought this, and they've decided to make themselves a box. So they've taken an offcut of red cedar, they've sawn it, and then if we look really close inside, we can see these marks here, and this would have been done with a wood auger. All right, and it would have been finished with a chisel. All right, so all that was done by hand, presumably by somebody who was a carpenter, possibly a boat builder. Okay, it's obviously seen a lot of service, a lot of wear. This one's the same. Unfortunately, we have a bit of damage here. And we have the initials here, JM, whoever JM was. Alright, so obviously it took a bit of time and a bit of effort to make this box. Alright, so obviously there were somebody who worked with wood. I'm going to clean this up in a second. I'm going to put see if we can get a little bit of this grime off. But red cedar in itself is a very, very rare wood, and it's not available commercially anymore because it was incredibly over harvested. Alright, this photograph is not of red cedar, but it shows a couple of woodcutters from the late 19th century. This is 1895. Okay, so you got a couple of blokes there, and you know, in that day and age, there was not a lot of regulation. There wasn't a lot of government involvement in these type of things. People like this just went out by themselves and harvested timber, and the most sought after wood in Australia was Tuinae ciliata, or red cedar. Alright, it's a beautiful timber, it's really easy to work with, and that was just really, really, from the start of British colonisation, that was the number one timber that people were after. Okay, and unfortunately it was so over harvested that it's an incredibly rare tree today. At one stage it would have been relatively common, but now very, very rare to find a mature tree. If we look here, this is a botanical guide. Alright, and there's a picture. Just unfortunately just shows the foliage. Alright, this is an older name for it, Tuinae australis. Today it should be Tuinae ciliata. But the tree itself is quite a big tree. It's up to 40 meters. They can live for around about 500 years, and like I say, they were completely devastated and over harvested, and now an incredibly rare timber. And if you ever get scrap bits of wood like this, old skirting boards and floorboards that are red cedar, they're very, very valuable. Alright, and the wood was used from everything from, you know, planks of wood for houses to, you know, making cabinets to ships. It was the most sought after Australian timber in the 19th century, but again it was incredibly over harvested. Alright, so I'm just going to get this, and I'm just going to get a little bit of white spirit, and I'm going to get a little bit of fine steel wool, and I'm just going to clean that up, and I'm going to see if I can bring out a little bit of the red cedar and get it looking a little bit more red. At the moment it's just very grimy. You know, you can just feel it on your hands. It's very grimy. Obviously it spent a lot of time in some kind of workshop. So I've scrubbed it with a little bit of methylated spirits or denatured alcohol, if you're watching this in the US of A. So you could put an oil in this, I suppose, but I'm just using a little bit of beeswax, and that really brings out the colour. It kind of looks a little bit lackluster, but then when you get a little bit of beeswax in there, you get the natural red colour of the wood coming out. One of the things about red cedar and why it became such an endangered tree is that it grew along riverbanks, so it was quite often easy access for these people. Obviously they could float the logs downstream. Also, another thing about red cedar is when it sheds its leaves, and in the spring its leaves come back, it produces a real red flush of new growth. And what these old woodcutters would do when they were looking for the red cedar, they would go on the top of a hill. You know, they go to the top of the highest piece of land, and they would look out on the landscape. A little bit too much there. They would look out on the landscape, and they would see the tops of the trees, and they would see this bright red foliage from quite a distance, and it made it easy for them to find where the red cedar was growing. Alright. So the kind of habit of the tree, you know, kind of led to its downfall as well. But it's a really good example of how, you know, human beings, you know, can really mess around with nature too much and just really destroyed what was a brilliant natural resource. Like I say, you can't buy this wood anymore, this timber. So it's really crappy with video. You know, video's not very good at getting, you know, the tones and the colours right. But that's producing quite a rich, quite a beautiful sort of red colour. Okay, and you know, looks pretty nice. One of the things about these things like these older pieces of gear, quite often you don't want to muck around with them too much and strip them back too much, simply because, you know, they lose a lot of the character, you know. So I mean, somebody could go crazy and sand that right back and maybe fill that, but it's all part of the character of, you know, the piece. Such a great piece of history. Quite sad in a way.